Hello and welcome to the M.B.M podcast, where you'll learn to master the business of yoga. M.B.M is a proud part of the Wander Barn podcast network, and I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith. I'm a 500-hour registered yoga teacher, a yoga business coach, and a total business geek. Here at M.B.M, you'll learn everything you need to know to create a sustainable yoga business by learning from myself and guests from around the world about how they built their yoga businesses, and about how you too can become a successful yoga teacher, studio owner, and much more. All right, let's dive in. Hey friends, I just wanted to pop in and talk a little bit about M.B.M Behind the Scenes. When I entered the yoga world as a teacher, I was surprised by how many yoga teachers were struggling with the business side of yoga. And that's why I created M.B.M. M.B.M helps yoga teachers and studio owners become entrepreneurs. It helps you to go from surviving to thriving with your yoga business. I am on a mission to change the yoga industry, to teach yoga teachers and studio owners about the business of yoga, and to help you feel more confident, successful, and abundant. After releasing hundreds of podcast episodes, I want to create content that dives deeper into helping yoga entrepreneurs thrive and elevate their businesses. This is where M.B.M Behind the Scenes comes in. Each week, you will get bonus content from the weekly guest or myself, diving deeper into how you can take the teachings and apply them to your business. This podcast is designed for yoga teachers and studio owners who are ready to take it to the next level. If you enjoy M.B.M and have been looking for an affordable way to learn more, this is it. For the cost of 2 lattes per month, you will get never-before-heard content that you can't access anywhere else that will give you tangible ways to dive deeper into your yoga business. If this sounds like something you're interested in, let's dive in. Head on over to patreon.com/MBM yoga and sign up to get behind the scenes now. Once again, that's patreon.com/MBOM yoga to get all the exclusive behind the scenes content. I'll see you there. Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of the M.B.M podcast. This episode of the podcast is brought to you in part by OfferingTree. OfferingTree is your one-stop shop for all things website, email newsletter, online memberships, courses, scheduling payments, and much more. They seriously do everything that you need as a yoga business owner. I'm going to tell you a bit more about them later in the episode, so stay tuned for that. Now, today I have some really exciting news that we're celebrating. Today is M.B.Om's 5th birthday, to the day. On February 1st, 2016, I launched M.B.M for the first time, and I launched with the first few episodes, and I had no idea what on earth I was doing with this podcast or this business. I just felt like I was creating something that would help me and the other yoga teachers who wanted to learn about the business of yoga. And over the last 5 years, it's been a very incredible journey. It's had lots of ups and lots of downs and lots of all the things in between, as all business owners do. And today I'm just really excited to reflect on the last 5 years of M.B.M. I have done hundreds of episodes. I've talked to hundreds of yoga teachers and studio owners and business professionals, and thousands and thousands and thousands of you have listened from all around the world. I've had hundreds of thousands of downloads, which is so amazing. And I really could not have done this without you. If you did not download the show, if you didn't subscribe, if you didn't share it, if you didn't recommend guests, if you hadn't been guests on the show, I would not have been able to continue this for so long. So I wanted to start this episode by just saying that I am so incredibly grateful for you. Thank you for listening to M.B.M, whether you've listened to one episode or all of the episodes, or you've joined me sometime in between February 1st, 2016 and February 1st, 2021. Either way, I'm so grateful for you. And I wanted to do something special for M.B.Om's 5th birthday. So what I'm doing is a special giveaway for listeners of the podcast. It is the opportunity to win a 1-hour business strategy consultation session with myself. It's a value of $150 and it'll be completely free if you win. All you have to do is enter your email address to win. You will get added to my email newsletter after that, but you are always welcome to unsubscribe at any time. So if you don't want to hear from me, it's totally fine. You can still enter. I would still love for you to enter and have the chance to win. The link is going to be in the show notes at mbmyoga.com. mbomyoga.com, and I'll also say it here. So it's mbomyoga.ck.page/birthday. That's mbomyoga.ck.page/birthday. Go there, enter your email address, and in a week's time, I am going to do a draw and somebody is going to win a 1-hour consultation call with me. So you have from today, February 1st, until end of day on February 7th to enter this draw. And after that, I will connect with the winner and we can set up our call. So I hope that you are as excited as I am about M.B.M turning 5. Thank you for celebrating with me and for listening to the show. Now, on to today's episode of the podcast. I am very excited to be joined by Erin O'Hara. Erin O'Hara joined us all the way from Auckland, New Zealand. She runs a number of yoga and meditation practices out of her Golden Yogi studio, and she's the Golden Yogi Director and Founder, a yoga and meditation teacher, a qualified naturopath, a medical herbalist, and a passionate health and wellness lover. So as you can imagine, Erin and I had a lot in common and a lot to talk about on this episode because she is just so full of life and she just runs a really, really fabulous business. So on this episode, Erin and I talk about how she first got into yoga. We talk about what inspired her to become a yoga teacher and then what inspired her to create Golden Yogi. And then we talk about how the last year really has been very crazy for studio owners. We talk about what it was like when the pandemic hit, how she was able to pivot, and what things are like now. And New Zealand has been a little bit unique from the rest of the world because they were able to slow the virus down quite fast. They went into very extreme lockdowns, a couple of them back to back. So Erin talks about pivoting online. She talks about fully closing her studio. And then she talks about opening fully back up and basically living a normal life, which for those of us in the Western Hemisphere, that sounds pretty amazing right now. And of course, we dive into her biggest business lessons that she's learned through the pandemic and through her business in general. So I hope that you enjoy this episode of the podcast with Erin. And without further ado, here she is. Welcome to the podcast today, Erin. I'm super excited to have you here with me today.
It's lovely to chat to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And can you tell listeners where you're joining us from today?
I'm from Auckland in New Zealand.
Amazing. I think you might be my first guest from New Zealand, which is pretty amazing because I've done a couple hundred episodes at this point.
Wow, that's super exciting.
Yeah. I'll have to go back and check for sure, but I'm thinking off the top of my head that you're my first guest from New Zealand, which is amazing. I visited New Zealand in 2011 and absolutely loved it. I felt like it was like a smaller version of Canada. Just the culture is incredible, the landscape's incredible, the people are so kind. So yeah, I'm really, really excited to chat with you today.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat to you too. I would totally describe it similar to Canada as well.
That's nice to hear. I'm glad I'm not off base with that. And so let's start with a little bit about your yoga story. Can you tell me how you first got into yoga?
Yeah, I started yoga when I was at university. So back when I was about 19. And I had gone through a period where I got really sick in my late teens, finishing high school, going to university time. And I started with glandular fever and it got really complicated. And I had a lot of other problems that came from that. And yoga was part of my healing pathway. I had done a lot of other mainstream medical pathway as well as alternative alongside. And that's what really brought me to yoga because I'd always been very, very sporty, did a lot of competitive swimming and running. And I just wanted to move my body while I was still sick and rebuild my body. So that is where yoga really started for me. I kind of just dropped into the odd class. I wasn't very consistent for the first couple of years. And then I got into racing triathlon, and that's really what kickstarted a more regular practice, regularly going to classes. And I'd say it was definitely the sort of typical person starting yoga, all about relaxing and stretching, and kind of went from there on to doing a lot of Ashtanga yoga. That was my main practice until it got a little bit too much, too physical, while I was racing as a professional triathlete through North America. And so that is where I sort of wound my practice down a little bit, started doing a lot more yin yoga while I was living in LA, and also got into practicing Kundalini yoga, which is my main practice that I love to do now. And I've sort of continued that for many, many years now. I've been teaching for 10 years, and I've been practicing yoga for about 18 years from that journey start.
Wow, that's amazing. And I love how your practice evolved as well. It's always really interesting to hear those stories. And I'm curious, when on your yoga journey did you decide to become a teacher?
I've decided to do teacher training because when I started Kundalini yoga, I just really loved the practice, and there was something in me that thought, oh, better do teacher training. I want to learn more. So I definitely went into the teacher training not wanting to teach, but just wanting to learn more about the yoga practice and meditation. And it was at a time where I was transitioning from, I was still racing on the professional triathlon circuit, and I was living in LA, and I did it while I was still racing. I was kind of finishing up, sort of going through that transitional phase of wanting to do something else. And that's where I thought I'll do my yoga teacher training. I already have a naturopathy degree, and I thought, well, that will go nicely with doing the naturopathy. And I was ready for a change in career. So I did the teacher training more out of interest more than anything. And I was having a bit of time out. And I thought, what better thing to do than a lot of yoga?
Yeah, I love it. That's a great way to spend a little break in time with your career. And I'm curious then, so once you got your teacher training, did you start teaching right away, or what did kind of the evolution of your career in terms of teaching look like?
I did actually. I was still living in LA, and I was teaching a little bit, but I was a little bit restricted with my visa because I had a professional athlete visa. So I did a little bit of teaching mainly for groups of friends. And then I decided to move back to New Zealand to be closer to my family. I made that decision because I thought that that would be a better place for where I'd want to set up long term. And also, I could also run my clinic. And so I moved back to New Zealand. And then when I came to New Zealand, Kundalini yoga was really unknown here. And so I actually was more challenged than I ever realized when I came back here about trying to get teaching work was so hard because nobody even knew what Kundalini yoga was, really. So I couldn't really get any teaching work. People would ask me to cover classes like vinyasa. I was like, I can't teach vinyasa. I don't know how to teach vinyasa. And so it was a really interesting time. So I ended up just teaching pregnancy yoga a lot because I'd done the training with Gamuk, and one of the yoga studio owners knew of the training, so they got me teaching pregnancy yoga, and that was kind of my into teaching classes. And I set up some of my own classes in some community centers, which was really hard, sort of moving around, moving gear around, not kind of having a stable base with teaching, and also setting up a clinic at the same time. So I made the decision very quickly. The plan was to come back and set up some classes and build some community and then open a yoga studio. But it actually happened very fast. In 18 months, I went from deciding that being all over the place, teaching in different halls and different places, was actually going to be too hard and very hard to grow community. So I opened a studio very quickly, and it grew very fast too, because I hired teachers from different styles of yoga and put it all into one studio, what I've called Golden Yogi, and that was sort of the start of the journey of having the yoga studio. And then I've taught a lot of yoga. Owning a yoga studio when you start out, the best way to get it going is teach a lot yourself to cut some costs. So I was teaching about 20 classes a week for the first couple years, and I still teach a lot of yoga because I love it. I'd probably teach about 15 classes now, And I've done that for the last 7 years, taught a lot of yoga.
Wow, that's amazing. And so you've had Golden Yogi for 7 years at this point?
Yeah.
That's amazing. And so what was it like first opening a yoga studio? Like what was that kind of experience like, becoming a business owner in that way and teaching a good portion of your classes and that type of thing?
The thing with opening a yoga studio is I was lucky. I was young. I was 29 and I didn't have a family, and I could just devote 150% of my energy at the yoga studio and get it off the ground and build it. And I think that's what really helped me, is that I could just have the time and love for yoga to put into growing the community, because it is a lot of energy to get something off the ground. And I was lucky that I found a good team that supported me with teaching. So I wasn't teaching all the classes. I hired teachers that already had profile in the community, because from moving from LA to New Zealand, I'd never lived in Auckland apart from being at university about 10 years before that. So I didn't really know the community here. So I hired some teachers that already had a profile. So the first day when we opened the studio, it was really exciting, because it was a whole lot of people coming, following other teachers, not so much me, coming in to create a new yoga studio. And it was so busy to the point where it actually was a little bit overwhelming, the amount of people that had come and supported it to start the studio. And that was exciting. And then I just put my heart and soul into growing it. I used to teach 7 days a week. I'd be at the studio every day for about 2 years. The first 2 years, I'd just work every moment of every day, basically, to really grow the community. And it really developed a lot from there. And the community has really embraced also the Kundalini yoga practice here in New Zealand. So we still have all the styles in equal amounts. So it's a very nice, diverse studio offering vinyasa, yin, Kundalini. We do gong baths and yoga nidra. So it's a real mixture, which is really opens a lot for one of my views of yoga is offering different styles, because different practices really resonate with different people and different parts of your journey. And so it's really nice to be able to have that nice foundation of offering all the different styles as well. But if you're looking at opening a yoga studio, just be prepared that you're a business owner as well. It's not that you love yoga and you just want to teach more yoga, because that passion won't carry you through getting a yoga studio off the ground. I've seen that lots of times before, where people think that they have this dream of owning a yoga studio, but just know that you've got to have that balance of know that you're also opening a business, and you've got to be able to have a nice balance of being able to do all the accounts. And usually when you're starting out a studio, you do a lot yourself, because it helps you to reduce your costs, so you can have a better sort of flow into getting the business established. And so I think just being prepared and know that it takes more energy than you could probably ever realize if you're starting a studio, and until it really develops, and then you can get more support as you go, is how I did it. If you've got a lot more funding behind you, I didn't. I had very limited funds. I actually invested all my money and got a loan to get the studio going. So I had to kind of cut a lot of corners to try and make sure I was keeping within budget to establish the studio. And I also set myself a goal that I needed to have it breaking even within the first year, because I knew that I needed to have a strong goal that I could achieve, because otherwise I didn't want to slip into that trap of being a business owner that thinks that there's always hope that it's going to get going and develop a profit, when really you're just kind of pushing a truck up a hill. So I made sure that I was really working on getting it so it was an established business very quickly within the first 1 to 2 years was my goal, so I could get it up and running, because obviously I was relying on it also for my income, because I didn't have another job. I just did the yoga studio and run a clinic, and that was it. And so I needed it to get off the ground very quickly.
Yeah, for sure. And so, I mean, obviously you were able to have that success in that first year. I'm curious, what are like a couple key things that you did in that first year that you think were really, really helpful in getting to that break even point and being able to continue the studio?
I think one of the key points would be to hire teachers that already have established themselves as a profile and an identity. Because every teacher, one thing with a yoga studio is that people don't always come for the yoga studio. They come for a particular teacher quite often. And we all do it. I do it as well, as I have favorite teachers I love to follow. And so the key with setting it up was really about having teachers that already had profiles. So I think that was probably the best thing I ever did with starting the studio, was not relying on my own profile, but relying on the profile of other teachers that were working at the studio. And I think, yes, you'll pay more for having those sorts of staff, but they are the biggest asset of your business. A yoga studio, the number one asset is the teachers, because it's a service, and investing in the right staff to be teaching the classes is so, so important. And although it costs a bit more, your business will grow faster. And I think that's one of the best things I ever did with starting the studio, was choosing the right teachers to give me the right support to get the studio going. And I would highly recommend that if you're starting a studio, is making sure you've got that right balance. And then the other thing was just cutting costs where I could. I did so much myself. My sister helped a lot with the marketing, and we did all our own marketing. We did a little bit of Google AdWords, but just kept the cost really minimal. And I also worked alongside Lululemon as an ambassador, which also helped with just getting connection to community, because the biggest thing with starting a studio is about having connection to your local community. And it's not so much about building a big Instagram following all around the world, because they're never going to come to the yoga studio if you're a physical premises. And so I really just kept my focus on connection to local community of people that would actually come along to classes and be regular students at the studio. And with a yoga studio, it really grows little by little. So as you get students that come and they love it and they really get into their practice, they tell their friends. And word of mouth is so powerful. And a lot of growing a yoga studio is building that profile and having the long game ahead of you of working on developing it as you go. And the more people love what you're offering, so offering a high-end service, then the more people will keep wanting to come back, and they'll also tell their friends. And that's really what grows it to be a very solid studio. Yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing all of that. And I love everything that you've done to, create a successful studio. And I'm curious because the last basically all of 2020 has been a really wild time, I think, for most people, but particularly studio owners have had to go through a lot. So I'm curious, what did you do when the pandemic hit with your studio?
So I actually was watching what was happening overseas with other studios. I get a lot of newsletters from other studios around the world from visiting them. And so I had a feeling it was going to progressively get worse. So I was just watching what other studios were doing with their classes. And so that was kind of gave me some sort of ability to sort of navigate, okay, what am I going to do to flip the studio once it gets to the point where we end up in lockdown in New Zealand? And so it was a really challenging time. I would say just as challenging as doing a startup business was the pandemic, as you had to move fast and work out which direction you were going to go. I moved the studio to be on Zoom and ran live classes on Zoom and a slightly reduced schedule, but still quite a strong schedule. And the first lockdown, because we have done 2 lockdowns in New Zealand, the first lockdown was 6 weeks. And people really embraced the doing yoga online, doing the Zoom, and kept their memberships going as well, which I think was really, really important to keep the community connected, but also their ability to keep their membership going really helped to fund the studio through the pandemic. I was just lucky I was in quite a good financial position going into the first lockdown. So, because you needed cash flow behind you, otherwise you wouldn't survive going through lockdown. So that was flipping to online was really important to keep the connection going into lockdown, but also coming out the other side, because people came straight back to classes. We did social distancing at the start, and then we actually went back to operating like normal in, I think it was about June. And we had about 3 months of just like normal operation again, and it was really nice. Everything was growing. It was growing at a fast rate. People were getting back into their practice. People who didn't want to do it online were coming back. And then we actually got a second lockdown in August, and we closed up again for 3 weeks. And I didn't really do as much online for the second round because, to be honest, I was a little bit burnt out working that intensely all year round, making the changes between online and then opening and rebuilding a business and then going back into lockdown. I actually just did some workshops the second round and kept it minimal, and people come back. Like, if you've built a strong community, after this lockdown, we opened actually on the 1st of September again, and people come back and and it grew just as quickly as after the first lockdown. So it's been through quite a lot of change this year, and it's been quite demanding on kind of working out what direction to take it. I have made the decision to also build a yoga app. So if this continues ongoing with other lockdowns, I think what I noticed some other studios have done overseas as well is having an app so people can do on-demand yoga rather than having to do everything live. And I think that the live classes are really lovely, but and it's nice because you get that little connection before and after a class, but it means that everyone's restricted to a timetable, and that doesn't always work with homeschooling kids and working and the different life that everyone has when they're in a lockdown. So I think having on-demand classes where they can jump on and do yoga anytime has its advantages. Yes, it's not as connected with community, but it also means that people have a better accessibility to doing classes, which is really, really helpful. And we loaded some on YouTube as well, which meant that there was always access to yoga, because I think this year, more than any other year, people have really needed their yoga practice because there's been a lot of stress, there's a lot of job loss, there's a lot of uncertainty. And I think that coming to your yoga mat and your yoga practice and doing meditation, these things really, really help us to navigate through the changing times and to have that strong nervous system to be able to adapt. And that's the number one thing I think we get out of our yoga practice, is to be able to adapt and to be flexible, not just in our physical body, but flexible in our minds and our outlook to life as well. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing all of that. And I 100% agree. I think just for me personally, my yoga and meditation practice has been really, really key over the last couple of months. And then I work with a couple of studios as well, both in Canada and the US. And yeah, the feedback from students has just been like, thank you so much for continuing to provide opportunities to practice because, like you said, people have needed it more than ever with so much uncertainty in the world. And I think the studio that I work with here in Canada, our clients have just said like this is the one thing that I knew I could count on because I knew what the schedule looked like and my favorite teachers were still teaching. And when I wasn't sure if my kids were going to go to school or if I was still going to have a job or if we're working from home or my favorite restaurants are going to survive this, like I knew that I could go to yoga with my favorite teacher, and that was like enough to kind of get them to the next day type thing. So it's pretty incredible to hear things like that and to just be reminded of, the power of the practice and the work that we do.
Yeah, I think it's just so powerful in just creating that daily check-in point with doing some breath work and moving your body, especially if you're locked up at home with the pandemic. And also one thing I noticed with doing classes on Zoom, the amount of kids that joined in.
Mhm.
And I thought that was so amazing that some parents were kind of making it part of the structure of the day of doing yoga. And yeah, the kids would join in and then they get really distracted and you'd see them on the screen and then they've gone and then they've come back again. But it's really nice that kids also got to experience doing some yoga, even if they didn't do the whole thing, just by listening to it and doing some breath work was so powerful for them as well, as to learn a bit about yoga. When I lived in LA, it was quite common to bring kids along to classes, but you don't really see it that often. And I think that kids that whatever they learn in yoga, they remember forever, is one thing I've noticed from teaching kids yoga, is that you can say one thing or teach them one posture, one breath, and you can ask them a year later and they'll still remember it. And it's incredible how their little minds work. So I really love that element, that parents were really embracing getting their kids into some yoga as well as themselves, and enjoying that time together at home.
Mhm. And now it's time for a short break from the show to talk about our sponsor, OfferingTree. If you're interested in finding an all-in-one platform for online or in-person teaching, then you should definitely check out OfferingTree. OfferingTree set out to make creating your digital presence fun, easy, and affordable. With one click, you can build a website, run online or in-person live classes, sell pre-recorded classes, manage memberships and packages, and much more. Communicating with your students is seamless and easy with their automated email system and email marketing tools. Already have your own website? No problem, because OfferingTree can embed seamlessly into your existing website. They're always adding new features to their platform to make it even better. They just recently released the online store feature that lets you easily sell digital content like yoga videos, challenges, and courses right from your website. If you're looking for a single platform to take care of all of your online and in-person teaching needs, then visit offeringtree.com/M.B.M. OfferingTree has been supporting M.B.M for over a year now, and I not only love the product, but I also love the people. OfferingTree is providing special pricing for M.B.M listeners, so be sure to visit offeringtree.com/M.B.O.M. That's offeringtree.com/M.B.O.M. to receive the discount. All right, now back to the episode. Yeah, sort of similar experience over here. We actually ran like a daily kids yoga class just for 30 minutes. It was free for the community. And yeah, they were some of our busiest classes. We just ran them kind of in the heat of when we were in lockdown over here, which was, I guess, kind of like mid-March till sort of mid-May, I guess. So like about 8 weeks, we were in a pretty heavy lockdown. And yeah, it was really cool to see all the kids practicing and seeing them engaged and stuff like that. So it's cool that you had that experience as well. And one of the things I'm curious about, because I think a lot of studio owners, were put in the same position that you were in, is just the business lessons that you've learned throughout this experience. Can you share some of those?
Yeah, I think the one thing that the pandemics really sort of brought to light is I think every business owner reviewed their business and worked out, what's working, what's not working, where are we overspending our budgets that we don't need right now. And I think that really sort of made me check in and look at the business and what things were really working and what's the foundation of a yoga studio. And I guess one thing when you're in owning a yoga studio and you're always looking at different opportunities and teachers are always emailing with different workshops and different teacher trainings, and you get a lot coming at you and you're always filtering. But I think this year, one decision I made was about just going back to the solid foundations of what a yoga studio is, which is offering regular yoga classes and keeping that consistency and that solid timetable and not getting too fancy with it is one pathway I chose, because sometimes you can get into offering more and more and more, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the business is doing any better financially. So I made the decision that I'd rather offer a really solid timetable with classes throughout the day and lots of variety rather than offering a lot of workshops and teacher trainings. Usually here in New Zealand, I bring in international teachers. So obviously with the borders shut, there are no trainings. And I don't really want to offer teacher trainings online. I feel like yoga trainings really need to be face-to-face is just my personal view. I think there's so much that you get out of being in that group energy and group environment. So I've just gone back to basics of running a yoga studio of regular classes. And one thing I do feel really blessed about is working as a naturopath, because that was a little bit more adaptable to the flip between being in a consultation room to being online on Zoom. I found that that's probably been another part of the backbone of my business through this year, is just being able to run a consistent, solid practice in clinic, because it was a little bit more adaptable and being able to courier out all the products. And people have really needed it as extra support on top of their yoga practice. I run a general clinic, and I see people with all sorts of conditions, autoimmune conditions, hormone imbalances. But this year, I've really noticed a lot of people really burnt out and a lot of anxiety and depression. So it's been nice to be able to offer that extra support on top of the yoga as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting that you bring that up, because I have a naturopath that I go see her a couple times a year. And normally for me, it's things like, my stomach has digestive issues or hormones are off balance. And when I went to see her when we got out of lockdown, everything that came up was like burnout, fatigue. My adrenals were really fatigued. And she was like, your body's like really stressed. I was like, okay, yeah, that kind of makes sense, because I've been pretty stressed with the work that I'm doing over the last couple of months. And that was a reminder for me of like, okay, yeah, I'm practicing yoga, I'm meditating, but I need to be really prioritizing those practices, my self-care, my boundaries around my work, and that type of thing. So I personally experienced exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have, and it's about, like you just mentioned, boundaries, but really that is what it is going through this year, is that you can get really overwhelmed and think you need to do more and more and more. And also with not having sort of set work hours, and you can let it take over your whole entire world. And that's where having those boundaries and having that solid foundation of consistency with practice and extra support if you need it can be so, so helpful. I noticed for myself, I'm like, thank goodness I'm a naturopath to get through this year, because I can make sure I've got the right support going into my own body, because I have needed that extra support beyond just my yoga and meditation practice with supporting adrenals, so I can adapt to having all the adaptogen herbs to be able to adapt to stress and change.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's really great that you've got that. And so I'm curious, now in New Zealand, you guys are kind of back to normal right now at the time of talking, other than borders are closed and that type of thing. What do you kind of see for your studio in the next, couple of months? What are you kind of working towards?
I'm just working towards what I was doing after the last lockdown. So it feels like a second round of the same thing. And I guess that's what, when we came to a second lockdown, for me, it was a real mental challenge because, you've just gone through, rebuild your studio, and then to have everything, it's kind of like someone puts the handbrake on and then you've got to do it all over again. So I feel like it's round two of rebuild and put the energy back in the right direction of regrowing the studio. Yesterday was actually our first day with being able to operate like normal, not having to do social distancing and being able to run normal studio classes. And it's just about building that consistency back and encouraging people back to class. Like I've noticed that some people after lockdowns, they get a little bit hesitant and nervous to go back out into the community. And sometimes it just takes time, and then eventually they'll trust that they can get out and do what they love to do back in the community. And I think for anyone who has a studio in other parts of the world who are coming out of lockdowns, you've just got to be patient is probably the biggest thing that I've learned, is that it's not about rushing everything back into what it was, because it's going to take time. And it's like building a startup business, but everything works faster. And I would describe it like 1 year in business is like 1 month. So it kind of every month it gets a little busier. The studio gets this community gets a little stronger, and it feels a little bit more normal. And I'm just taking it week by week and month by month, and you never know what's around the corner. And I think that's the biggest lesson we can learn through this year, especially in life and in business, is to be adaptable, of kind of working with where you're at the moment and staying in that moment in time of rebuild, and then if things change again, adapting to that change and not getting too caught up in it not being how you want it to be, because otherwise you'll just end up really depressed and anxious. So I think it's about just being really patient. And it's great. Yesterday was great seeing classes fuller and happy faces and the community together, because online yoga is so lovely, but to be honest, there's nothing that quite beats being back in a community, in a studio space with group energy and having that connection to people. I think yoga is about union and connection, and it's just as much about the practice as it is about connection to people in the community. So it has been lovely to be back open and connecting as a community.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. We were able to open the studio where I live in the third week of June, and it was incredible to be back, just like breathing with other people and moving with other people. I was able to get into my practice in a way that I wasn't able to when I was just practicing via Zoom. And, I'm so, so, so grateful to work in an industry that works online, that we could just, transition businesses online. But it's also really nice, just like you said, to be back in person in that community atmosphere and to practice with the teacher and the other people around you and that type of thing. So I'm really glad that you've been able to reopen now for a second time. Fingers crossed there's no more lockdowns over in New Zealand. And yeah, I'm really grateful for this conversation, Erin. And I'm curious, where can people go to find you and find more about you and your studio?
So the studio's in Takapuna in Auckland, and it's called Golden Yogi And you can find information about our studio at goldenyogi.co.nz, and you can see what we offer and the classes. It's in a beautiful little, it's in the main city, but we're on the North Shore, and it's very close to the beach. It's very nice. And I think that's probably one other thing I've been very grateful for this year, is living in such a beautiful, divine place with a beach right there, to be able to get outside and still enjoy being in nature. Even if we are meant to be in lockdown, we can still get outside and adapt to being in nature again.
Mm-hmm. I 100% agree with you. I don't live close to a beach, but I live in the mountains, so I have lots of access to nature, and that has honestly been a lifesaver over the last couple of months. So I will make sure there's links for all of that in the show notes. And thank you so much for your time today. This conversation's been really uplifting.
Wonderful. Thank you.
All right, friends, I hope that you enjoyed that episode of the podcast with Erin O'Hara from Golden Yogi in New Zealand. I hope that you learned a lot from that episode. We continued the conversation on the Behind the Scenes feed, where we talked about her top tips for studio owners and yoga teachers that have been struggling during the pandemic. We cover what worked best for her and her business, what she would advise for a studio owner that's barely surviving right now, and so much more. So if you want to get access to that, you can head on over to patreon.com/M.B.M yoga. It costs $12 a month to be a part of the feed. You can cancel anytime. And there are, plenty of episodes there now. There's about 20 episodes up on the feed. So you can get access to all of them just in 1 month. So it's less than $1 per episode. And there is so much goodness. So once again, that's patreon.com/M.B.M yoga. I'd love to see you behind the scenes. Of course, a big thank you to the sponsor of the show, OfferingTree. Make sure you go check them out. They are seriously an incredible brand, an incredible business, and just really amazing people. And you can head on over to OfferingTree.com/M.B.M to get a discount if you want to check them out. And then once again, I just wanted to remind you about the giveaway for M.B.Om's 5th birthday. It's mbom.ck.page/birthday to enter that. Or you can just go to mbmyoga.com to the show notes for this episode and find that there. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the show. Thank you for being a part of the M.B.M community, and I will see you next week. Bye for now. Thank you so much for tuning in for this episode of the podcast. To find links, notes, resources, and everything mentioned in today and all episodes of the show, you can head on over to mbomyoga.com. You can find the podcast and myself on Facebook and social media at Mastering the Business of Yoga. And I would love for you to join the private Facebook community, Yoga Business Badasses. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please make sure you reach out to me at info@mbomyoga.com. And last of all, if you enjoyed this episode of the show, please make sure you hit subscribe and leave a review for the podcast. It would mean the world. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Namaste.